This is the second part of the 2-series training on developing your customer segmentation. In the first section, we discussed how to create your segments. In this section, we'll discuss how to maximize your segmentation by quantifying it. To start, you'll need to quantify each one of the segments you've just defined. To quantify your segmentation, you'll likely want to look at both units and revenue. To do this, you'll need to answer 3 key questions. How many people will buy you? How much are they going to buy? And that'll account for your units. And then, for revenue, how much do you sell your product for? Depending on what stage you are at in your business, you may have some of this data, but some of this data you may have to use industry averages to use as assumptions, or you may have to make assumptions on other benchmarks. To calculate how many units you'll sell in each segment, you'll focus on how many potential customers you'll have and multiply that by how many units they'll each buy in a single purchase. Then, to quantify how much revenue you'll sell in each segment, you'll multiply your units by the average dollars that they'd spend. So now you might say, okay, I do have all that data. Or you might ask, well, how do I know how many customers are in each segment? To identify how many people are going to buy you, you'll want to look at market sizing. You'll start with the total addressable market and identify how many customers are in the total market. There's likely data that already exists on this. Then your serviceable addressable market is how many customers your business can actually reach with a total addressable market. And finally, there's your serviceable attainable market, the customers who will actually buy your product. In many cases, not all the time, the serviceable addressable market includes your total segmentation, while your serviceable attainable market is your target market, the segments that you actually focus on. Next, you'll address how much are they going to buy. The simplest way to calculate this is to take your total number of units that you've sold and divide that by how many customers you have. There's a more accurate way to do this because not all customers purchase the same amount, but it requires a bit of modeling work that's more complicated. So as a reminder, to quantify each segment, calculate how many people will buy you, how much they'll buy, then multiply the units by your price. So now that you've quantified each of your segments, you'll want to choose which segments you'll actually target. Who is in your target market? It might seem simple, just pick the biggest opportunities. And while market size is a critical factor, it's not the only one to take into consideration. You'll also want to take into consideration expected growth of each segment. So for example, your segment focused on boomers might be declining, while your segment focused on millennials might be growing. Next, you'll also want to think about how your brand compares to competition. So if one segment is very likely to switch to your brand versus your competition, while another segment isn't very likely to switch, you'll most likely want to focus on the segment that's easier to win over. Then, finally, how hard is it to reach your segment? How much are you going to spend to reach each segment? For example, if one of your segments doesn't spend much time online, then you'll likely have to spend a lot more to reach them. Are they worth it? So taking into account all 4 of these factors, then you can prioritize which segments you'll want to go after. There's one more factor that I also find important, but most companies don't focus on. This is lifetime value. How much is a customer worth in a lifetime? Companies tend to focus on the short term, how many sales they can acquire in the short term. But the reality is, I build brands to win in the short term, but more importantly, win in the long term. And to win in the long term, you want to identify the segments with the greatest potential, their lifetime value. To calculate lifetime value, you'll take the number of customers who will purchase you just one time, multiply that by how much a one-time customer spends on average. Then you'll calculate the same for repeat customers. How many repeat customers you have, how much they spend on average in a single purchase, and multiply that by how many purchases they'll make in a lifetime. Then, by adding how much your one-time customers will spend and how much your repeat customers will spend, then divide that by your total number of customers, you'll have your lifetime value. So now let's look at some examples. We'll start with Salesforce again as our B2B example. and we'll look at how to quantify the segments we just developed for the organization. With Salesforce, we'll focus on their US operations, and their total addressable market is 32.5 million businesses. This is the number of total businesses in the US. The serviceable addressable market is 14.9 million, a little less than half of the total addressable market. These are the businesses who are focused on their customer experience. If you remember how Salesforce described their trailblazers, customer first was a critical attribute. Then, finally, the serviceable attainable market, where Salesforce is focusing their attention and those who are highly engaged in their industry. These are the reigning leaders, formidable competitors, ambitious innovators, and continuous delighters. This is roughly 9% of the total addressable market. These are the customers that Salesforce can not only reach, but can win with. With Salesforce's 2.9 million customer serviceable attainable market, you can see Salesforce isn't focused on the other 29.7 million businesses out there. This here in the segmentation in itself is a $65 billion opportunity, which they have 33% of today. Now, for each segment, we've quantified how many customers there are and multiplied that by the average spend in each category to show the potential revenue for each segment. You'll see across the top the reigning leaders, the formidable competitors, the ambitious innovators, and the continuous delighters. Under each segment, you'll have a reminder of the insights that drive those segments. And then you'll see the number of customers in each segment. With the reigning leaders, there's only 158. While with continuous delighters, there's 2.6 million potential customers. When you look at number of purchases, there's an NA for each one of these, because for Salesforce, most of their customers enroll on an annual basis. And then from an average spend, you'll see that the reigning leaders spend on average $9.5 million with Salesforce. That's a ton. While the ambitious innovators are only spending about $1,200 a year with Salesforce. So when you take the total number of customers, multiply that by the average spend, you'll see the potential revenue of each segment. The continuous delighters is by far the largest, with $62.3 billion in opportunity. But the reigning leaders is pretty large too, $1.5 billion in opportunity. So when Salesforce makes its decisions on how to prioritize its segmentation, they'll actually see that the reigning leaders is Salesforce's number one opportunity because of its size, but also because of Salesforce's current leadership in this space. It's also a very low cost to reach these customers since there's only 158 of them. So instead of going after a very small size of prize with lots of customers, they're going to focus on the reigning leaders first, and then focus on the continuous delighters because the opportunity is so big, then go after the formidable competitors, and finally, the ambitious innovators last. Now, those are all the part of the target market. This does not include the transitioning organizations and declining enterprises who are also in their segmentation. So now that we've looked at a B2B example, let's take a look at Target with our B2C example, again looking at the size of prize. So we'll address Target's market sizing first. The total addressable market for Target is 255 million, and this is the number of online shoppers, 78% of the US population. Like all retailers, Target is increasingly growing its Target.com business, so it's focusing its customer expansion in the online space. Then, as they look at their serviceable addressable market, there are 183 million shoppers in this space. These are those who are willing to pay for better quality, who truly meet the target guest profile. And finally, the serviceable attainable market is 144 million, focused on shoppers who are highly involved in the shopping experience. The green designers, the thriving explorers, the impulsive indulgers, the committed preparers, and the avid circlers. So as we look at target segmentation, the green designers, the thriving explorers, the impulsive indulgers, the committed preparers, and the avid circlers, you'll see right underneath, just like in the last one, the insights that drive these segments. They're there just as a reminder to ground you in each one of these segments. The segment sizes then show how many customers are in each one of the segments. The green designers and the committed preparers are the smallest with 16 to 17 million, while the thriving explorers, the impulsive indulgers, and the avid circlers are all more than double the smaller segments. Underneath segment size, you'll see the number of trips per year. These are how many times each segment is visiting target each year. The impulsive indulgers and the committed preparers are visiting almost twice a month, and so at the most at 24 times a year, while the thriving explorers and the avid circlers are visiting just once a month at 12 times a year. And finally, the green designers make the fewest trips because they're only visiting once every 6 weeks. Beneath that, you'll see the average spend, how much each segment is spending on average every time they make a trip. The green designers and the avid circlers are the smallest, while the impulsive indulgers and the committed preparers are the largest at $61 and $77. And finally, we'll look at the potential revenue. The potential revenue takes the segment size, multiplied by the number of trips per year, multiplied by that average spend to get to what that revenue could look like for each segment. And you'll notice the impulsive indulgers are by far the largest segment at $56.6 billion. The committed preparers are next at $30.2 billion. So when you look at these, the impulsive indulgers are by far the priority for Target. That's where they get their nickname, Target. They're the best guests, they're visiting Target frequently, have a high number of trips per year, and in each trip they're spending a fair amount as well because they're spending for their entire family, not just themselves. Now, as a reminder, these do not include the price hunters, the traditional rationalizers, and the world cultivators that are still in their segmentation, just not in their target market. And now we've looked at B2B and B2C examples for Salesforce and Target on how to quantify your segmentation and pick which segments to focus on, ultimately maximizing your segmentation. This training, combined with the first one on how to identify your segmentation, should now give you all the tools to build out your basic segmentation for your organization. Thank you for joining, and please reach out to me with any questions.